So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first presenter. Our first presenter is Nancy Buyle. She works at Macomb ISD. She is the School Safety and Student Assistant Consultant. She has a lot of years of experience, 22 years providing leadership and service support and educators at all different levels. As you can see, she's worked in school safety, crisis response, suicide prevention, the social emotional learning, and mental health. She also facilitates the county student assistant program and works with counselors, social workers. She's certified as a trainer in trauma interventions. And so with that, I'm looking forward to hearing from Nancy. So with that, I would like to go ahead and turn it over to her.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to present to everyone today. And I will be seeing the screen. Thank you very much. So I am honored to be able to speak to you today, and I can see that you have a whole wealth of information coming after my presentation on other impacts and the data that we're looking at regarding COVID-19 and the effects that it's had on our youth. So today, my presentation will focus on the mental health impacts that this has had. We know that we are in the midst of an ongoing crisis situation. So a crisis by definition is any incident or experience that overwhelms our ability to cope. And I think all of us will agree that what is going on currently with this pandemic definitely meets that criteria. The past 13 months, we have been unwittingly involved in a long-standing crisis. These are unprecedented times, and with that comes a lot of uncertainty, fear, and anxiety. And we're creatures of habit. Our youth are creatures of habit, and they're just starting to develop these routines and habits and consistency in their life. And anytime that something is what we're experiencing right now disrupts those routines, it creates a fair amount of stress, significant distress, and it throws people into a crisis situation. Having said that, how much that impacts us really is dependent upon our ability to become resilient or to gain the coping and strategies that will help us to be resilient and move on from something like this. So today, what I'm hoping to be able to touch on in the amount of time I have with you is how this crisis may be exacerbating some traumatic experiences that our youth are already having, and maybe that haven't had it, but will develop it now because of this. We will also discuss how to mitigate the likelihood of this becoming a traumatic experience. And my hope for you after this is that you can come away with some effective strategies to help the youth that you're working with or are involved with develop some resiliency. And hopefully what you'll learn is that you can take from this as well to help yourself. Because I understand that while we're focusing on youth, the first thing that we need to do is recognize that this has significantly impacted us, and our ability to cope and to manage through this stress is going to show our youth. We have to be the role models that they need us to be. Absolutely, anxiety, suicidal ideation. I see more even popping up right now. Brittany, are you able to read a couple of those too that you're seeing?
Sure. Let's see, we have a lot of anxiety, burnout, a sense of belonging, anxiety and depression, anxiety, indifference, social isolation, staff burnout, grief, the loss of friends, social activities, cultural routines, etc., uncertainty, bursts of outrage, anxiety, fear of going back, social isolation, stress, apathy, daily COVID outbreaks in Farmington Public Schools, uncertainty, fear, and silence. A lot of the same changing and emotional coping.
And so you'll see in that chat that you're really you're all aware of what you're seeing and experiencing. And we're all sort of becoming experts in this, unfortunately, and in this time. And what you're going to find out is what I'm going to present here in the next little bit are what you have just typed there is going to be similar to what we're seeing across the nation as I looked at the information that's becoming available in our nation and actually beyond, but particularly focused on the United States and Michigan, and then my personal experience as I work at the ISD. It's my 23rd year there, but I also do private practice outside of school hours in the evenings. And so I see a fair amount of youth in a therapy session. And some of this information that I'm going to provide is based on that as well. So a lot of the information that I gathered was sort of synthesized really nicely in this website. There's a group called Give Us the Floor, and it is an organization of youth facilitated by adults, but primarily youth driven. And they have a wealth of information on this pandemic, as well as other mental health topics. So it is based out of San Francisco. It's a nonprofit organization providing teens in distress with peer, positive human connection that they're too often missing. Here in Macomb County, actually, we started up a very similar, supposed to be a face-to-face. This, what I'm talking about right here, Give Us the Floor, is a virtual connection platform for youth. But the Shed is intended to be a physical place that high school teens can go to create, connect, and confide. And so we know through the research that is extremely important for kids who are feeling distressed and isolated and lonely and going through all the pain, pressure, and problems of youth, to be able to connect with their peers and have responsible adults facilitating chats and discussions and contacts. So this is a great agency that has developed a documentary, actually. And if you wanted, the resources are there. And I think the PowerPoint is in your Google Drive, so you can watch that documentary. But a lot of my next several slides are going to be based on information here that I think synthesizes what we're seeing so nicely. So some impacts that we're seeing is the social isolation, some of the same things that you've all just typed in there. But research tells us that we are social beings. We're hardwired to connect. So these stay home, stay safe orders have left our youth and many of us actually feeling very isolated and lonely. These are things that they struggle with as a natural course of growing up. And our lockdown orders didn't do our youth any favors. Teens I have worked with in the therapy practice have increased their use of alcohol and drugs. You might be thinking, how are they allowed to even do that? They can't go out. But I can tell you that in the past year, working with very vulnerable youth, they find ways to get out of the house. Parents often have no idea that sometimes kids we're trying to hold them in, they're going to want to get out. And they feel sort of like they're going stir crazy and they're missing their friends. While some are really nervous about the effects of the virus and bringing it home and getting it and giving it to other people, some feel trapped and they need to get out. And I can tell you, they're getting out. And seemingly, anecdotally anyways, and as well as some of the research that's starting to emerge, getting into drugs and alcohol to a bigger extent. Some of our youth are left feeling extremely fearful of the virus, as I was just saying, fearful they will get it, fearful they would give it. So they become anxious and do not want to go out. They're hesitant to take even their masks off. If they're even in their bubble, they don't want to take their masks off. And even now I'm still seeing that in some of the adults and youth who are vaccinated or have been with people that they're very familiar with. They still want to keep those masks on, and that can be extremely problematic. During the past year, we've seen an increase in referrals and requests for outpatient therapy. Many clinics are carrying huge waiting lists. And while telehealth has been a good thing and it's been an opportunity to get access to care that youth maybe never would have gotten, at the same time, not being able to meet their therapist in person has been detrimental. And there's still a lot of clinics actually around that are still just doing telehealth. And I can tell you that in my practice, I had teens, surprisingly enough, because we think they're on the social media and they don't really mind doing this. they were begging, when can I come back in? So as soon as we were allowed to open up those doors and we all felt safe enough, I've been seeing people in person with the proper guidelines and so forth in place. And they're ready. And so there's a nice video. I think you can look at the URL I typed in there. You can Google, let's see what it's actually, the title of it. Teens talk about mental health during the pandemic. And so this video is a 4-minute video that I'm not going to show right now, but if you want to go back to it and show it to your staffs, it's a great synthesis in 4 minutes of what we're talking about right now that can be put together. But what I did was I took information that I'm hearing from that documentary, from the Give Us the Floor, from what I'm seeing in our youth, and from what many of you have just typed, and have them right on the screen right now. So all of these feeling words are things that we're hearing and we're finding. So you can, feel free to type. We won't take a whole lot of time for this, but if there's one of those words that now are different and that you're saying, oh, wow, that's me, or that's what I see as well, that's different than what you typed in before, feel free to type that in and just chat with each other as I move on. But you'll notice that I put in pink heart that some of our teens are feeling hopeful. And that is extremely important in the times that we're in right now. And I'll talk a little bit about that toward the end, the importance of hope in all of this. But we're all feeling unproductive, concerned, overwhelmed, uncertain, all of these words. I'll just give you a second to peek at them. So all of those words, and now we're going to move into the perspectives on trauma, because this experience that we're going through right now can be extremely adverse and highly traumatic for some people. And the loss of life that we've experienced, the loss of our personal ability to just move about and socialize. As I said, we're hardwired to connect. We're social beings. We're built to be of service to one another. That has been significantly impacted over the last year plus. And what we need to pay attention to and realize is that already before the pandemic, nearly 35 million children and adolescents experienced one or more types of trauma. And this time is absolutely increasing or exacerbating that. But basically, 1 out of 4 students have experienced a traumatic event. 11% of girls aged 14 to 17 have experienced a sexual assault. This again is before pandemic time. 60% of students 17 or younger have been exposed to crime, violence, and abuse. And when youth are not able to continue with healthy routines, the effect of this adversity is heightened. So, and we often have no idea what our children have experienced. And I think the ACEs study shows us that. DSM-5 will show that a traumatic event and exposure to multiple traumatic events was the norm in many years ago. Probably 2013, around 90% of people have been exposed to some sort of a trauma. It's very common for our youth to experience adversity. And as I mentioned, the ACEs study is out there and it highlights this significant number of us who have experienced one or more adverse events. 61%, 1 in 6 have had 4 or more adverse events. And these events have the potential to cause trauma. COVID is now an ACE in and of itself, and the unintended consequences can also be very traumatic. The loss is very real. As I said, loss of life, loss of freedom, loss of sense of routine and predictability, which we know is critical if we're going to do well in adverse environments. So again, what we know before COVID is that anybody who's experiencing adversity, childhood adversity in particular, affects your child's attention, attachment, and emotional control. And this is, there's a wealth of knowledge and research, but Bessel van der Kolk He is the founder of the Trauma Center in Boston, and I think it's the National Childhood Traumatic Center. Will show that these are the themes for any child going through adversity or trauma. And so we're going to take a look at each one of these a little bit. Triggers associated with trauma can activate and often do activate our brain's limbic system, resulting in problems controlling our feelings and behaviors. So many of you, I think somebody put in that chat about rage and increased behaviors that you might be seeing. And so I'm hoping that what you can take away from here is the significant impact that a traumatic event or significant adversity can have on a child's ability to regulate emotionally. And so we're going to go over some of these strategies toward the end, but I just wanted to pop them up here as well. But teachers need to know, and maybe as you go back to your staffs, we don't need to be mental health specialists. And in fact, we're not asking teachers to be mental health specialists. I've talked to teachers about some of this, and they're like, oh, it's way over what I'm trained to do. But you don't have to be a mental health specialist or trained in trauma even to help students develop emotional control. To effectively deal with emotional dysregulation in a child or adolescent, we just need to be calm. We need to be role models, remember our breathing and remind ourselves to not take the behaviors that we're seeing in our students personally. No matter how provoking a student's behavior may be, it is not about us. It's not about them coming into your classroom or even over, whatever virtual platform you're teaching. They're not coming in there to wreck our days, although sometimes it feels that way. So we'll go over a little bit of strategies, but some of them that you're seeing right there are, it's huge to be able to do that. And what you can see now is we're not able to even do that during COVID and do it during the hybrid time. We can't necessarily assist in problem solving. We cannot allow for spaces necessarily to help them calm and regulate, but it is highly needed. Another big area of deficit with trauma or adversity is attachment. And trauma shapes a child's entire view of the world. It can significantly impact their ability to trust and feel safe, as well as their ability to relate with others and develop their social competence. And so students learn best in classroom environments that are warm, where they feel connected and safe. Students function best when positive interactions are modeled and their feelings are validated and the growth is acknowledged. And these are all things, whether the traumatic or traumatized or going through adversity, are going to be good for all kids. So keep that in mind as we move forward, that we're not asking you to do anything different for kids who are really significantly impacted by trauma, but what you can do in a classroom environment is just good for all education. It's good for every student.
Got a comment, Nancy, in the chat, just more of a comment. Said increased online gaming was listed with some of the negative impacts of the pandemic, parentheses, alcohol, drugs, tobacco. This could be a negative impact, but could also be viewed as a means to break social isolation, relate with others, and interact with peers, relatives, and other human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. And so again, it's the social media, the gaming, it can be positive, it can be negative. What we want to look for is just the level, the intensity, the frequency, and how really that behavior or that activity is being used as a coping strategy against other adversities, and how much it's taking away from what we or what the parents of that youth are expecting, reasonable expectations for participating in the family in a way that's healthy. If these things that they're doing are having a deleterious effect on their ability to be part of the family or connect with friends that maybe aren't the gamers like that, then we need to pay attention to that. But absolutely, we can do anything to a fault, right? So and even the typical substance use, we have some typical experimentation in our adolescents. But what I'm seeing is beyond that, where I think just anecdotally, excuse me, with the youth that I'm seeing, already vulnerable, they're in therapy because they're having some difficulty coping and effectively managing their life. And so they may already be more likely to experiment with drugs, but over the past year, taking it to a level that I hadn't seen in years previous. So that's very real. So maintaining a classroom structure and a predictable routine, allowing extra test taking time, all of these things, we're very limited in our ability to do some of these things over the past year. Certainly the structured environment that our students relied on has been significantly disrupted. And we've been unable to offer them this time to prepare for what's coming next. Many of us don't even know what's coming next. You're planning on being in school, and then, like somebody had just said, COVID numbers rise, and then you're highly suggested to go back to your virtual platform. And so because that's all over the place, we can't necessarily give our students the predictability and the routine and a heads up for what's coming next, because it can be changing hour by hour, day by day, month by month. And I have heard from counselors and I've heard from students, this sense of pressure over the past year since they've been remote has been significantly increased. And so these are some of your students who are already high achieving and really want to meet those expectations, feel as if they're always on, like they're in school 24/7. A lot of us are making assignments due by midnight that same day. And so the kids are feeling as if they just can't get away from that computer and the pressure of doing school all day long. So strong research on resiliency and what youth need to be mentally healthy helps us to see how we can help them. But this is a book right here where the author has stated this quote: "Adolescence is probably the last real opportunity we have to put individuals on a healthy pathway and to expect our interventions to have substantial and enduring effects." Their brain is very plastic. Developing brains undergo all kinds of pruning during this time. And what's going on right now is having a significant impact on that ability to actually prune in a way that's as healthy as we need it to be. And so we're going to look at this through the lens of resiliency now, and I'm going to flip over. And even though our brains are changing and we've been through all of this adversity and significant impact, because the brain is so plastic right now and because it is developing, we do have kids that are able to overcome this in very real and significant ways if we just kind of look at things a little bit differently and look at them from the lens of resiliency and hope. And so there's a researcher from Penn State University, Erie, Dr. Cherise Nixon, and she has done research and meta-analysis on resiliency. And basically, in a nutshell, and you can Google her name, and she has like a 35-minute, I think, video that really explains this model in some depth. But basically, she's saying that every youth needs acceptance, belonging, control, and meaningful existence. So you'll see ABC and the M and the E. So ABC's and me. Acceptance, belonging, control, and meaningful existence. She will say and tell us that the best way to get the ABCs in me is by helping kids develop 4 gems. And these gems are empathy, gratitude, forgiveness, and humility. So the 4 gems: empathy, it's a precursor to belonging and seeks to understand. It helps us to explore who we are. Gratitude is a predictor of overall well-being, happiness. There's a whole science of happiness and how gratitude actually helps us to become more hopeful and changes the brain in very real ways. Takes adolescents' negative mood and causes more positive mood and promotes meaningful existence. and appreciation for life. Forgiveness reduces anger and increases perspective taking. Humility, Charisse will say, is the one gem that if we have, it gives us all the other three. Self-focused to valuing others, superficial relationships to deep connections, fractured relationships to restore and promotes acceptance and belonging. So how do we help kids get this? We need to, as adults, teach them. These 4 gems lead to meaningful connections. Ultimately, they can change our focus and they can help to change our hearts. And the huge thing, if empathy, gratitude, forgiveness, and humility are the gems, then hope, I guess is what I'm saying, hope is the blue diamond of all of these gems. We need to help youth find hope. Hope is vital for growing through adversity. It's actually life-saving. Even as we work in the field of suicide, if we can help to instill the sense of hope, then we help kids find maybe one more day to stay alive, a little bit longer than what they were planning on staying alive before. But in suicide and significant adversity, hopelessness is huge. So it's a critical protective factor. It helps our youth navigate sometimes treacherous landscapes that often have a toxic element. Hope is the antidote to the effects of toxic stress and can breathe life into a youth and lead them to the path of resiliency. So resiliency can mitigate the effects of trauma, even with all of the adversity. If adults or youth in particular have this sense of resiliency, it's completely mitigated, if not completely taken away. We as schools can play a key role in addressing the needs of traumatized children by fostering characteristics of resilience. Research suggests that negative effects of adverse childhood experiences can be significantly reduced or eliminated by nurturing connections in school. The single strongest protective factor for a youth is having one close relationship with an adult. I say when I'm talking with the schools, I never want to discount our families, because that's the first place. And those are the significant relationships and positive relationships that youth get with adults. Having said that, there's a period of adolescence where we, as the adults in the school, can actually reinforce some of those messages that some of the youth are getting from their parents, that as they move through adolescence, they question as a matter of course. They just question whether or not their parents really know what's going on in this world. And when we as educators can reinforce some of these same things with them, then they can put the two together and they say, oh, well, maybe my parents do know something. Also, some of our parents don't have the tools that they need necessarily to help build this characteristic of resilience. Some of our youth are coming from very, very chronically stressed and toxic environments, either in their community or in their home. And so it is very important that they get that protective factor of one close relationship with an adult, primarily us in those cases, in the education field. We can be that one person. So we don't have to take away all their pain and all their adversity. We just need to be able to connect to them on a very social level and help build this characteristic of resilience. So resilience refers to a positive adaptation to life despite experiencing adversity. It's the capacity to bounce back after difficult circumstances. And the key factor is if we invest in good relationships with our students, they will be more likely to feel safe and better able to learn. So now I think I do have time to play a little video. It's 2 minutes and 18 seconds on resiliency. And I'm gonna hope that this works like it was when I tested it. Let me know if you can see it.
Resilience, it's not something
You can see it. It's loading.
that really can be built. Circumstances.
Can you hear it?
The key active core ingredient
Yes, you can
to
hear it as well.
building resilience. are the relationships the kids have to others who care about them.
Of course, families play a very important role, but nobody raises children in isolation. We have a huge amount of research to show the powerful impacts of teachers, coaches, other adults in the community with whom children have a chance to develop relationships, who play that critical supportive role of building resilience. As a result of responsive interaction, children build simple skills of coping and adapting. How to stop crying, how to regulate your behavior, being able to defer gratification.
You have an adaptive toolkit that allows you at moments of stress or challenge to bring out a number of potential skills that allow you to get through it.
As children get older, the sophistication of those skills increases. Being able to monitor situations, solve problems. The way we as a society can nurture the development of resilience is to help communities to pay more attention to building the capabilities of the adults who care for children and provide the supports they need to tip the scales toward more positive life outcomes.
And then when communities say, we want to be an active part of crafting the solution to really understand what's necessary to produce the resilience, that's when the ball gets rolling.
Resilience building, capacity building, is really in everyone's interest, and everyone reaps the benefits when we do that well.
So we're going to move into the strategies to build resiliency, and some of it you're going to hear, so that video just sort of reinforces some of what we're going to talk about right now. There's a combination of factors that contribute to resiliency, and relationships that create love and trust, provide role models, and offer encouragement and reassurance help to bolster a person's resilience. And so here you'll just see some of those that were reinforced by Cherise Nixon's research, the promoting empathy and problem-solving skills. And I have a slide in a little bit that's going to have like the 7 C's of resiliency. So several additional factors associated with resilience are the capacity to make realistic plans and to take steps and carry them out. Having a positive view of yourself and confidence in your strength and abilities, and helping children to learn how to figure things out or how to get themselves out of difficulties. Kids don't need us to provide the answers for them. They just need us to clear a way and show that we have hope and confidence that they can figure this out for themselves. And every once in a while they do need a hand. But if we're going to offer some advice, what I say is just ask for it. Would you like some advice? Because we don't want to take away their ability to feel as if they have agency in all of this and that they have the capacity and the capability to change things. Help them to regulate their emotions. I like to say, teach them to act, not react. And we know because of where trauma and adversity sit in the brain, it is more likely that we're going to react. And so because it's sitting in the limbic system, where we don't have access to our prefrontal cortex when we're triggered. And so we just need to help these youth shift from that limbic system up back into the prefrontal cortex. And that's pretty easily done if we're not ourselves triggered as well. And we can mirror. Every brain has mirror neurons. And so if you have your mirror neurons in control, the youth will just quite naturally and physiologically match the tone and temperament that you have. All of these can be skills that can be taught. And even if our youth don't have the capacity, or you in your teaching don't have the role to teach these skills, you can become the role model to demonstrate effective communication, the emotional regulation, the confidence, compassion. So developing resiliency is a personal journey. Not all journeys are the same. And we need to help our youth develop that sense of agency and confidence that they can do it. And so in looking at that, there's these, like a nice way to think about resilience is the 7 C's: competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, and control. So the first basically 4, I'll say keep your expectations high and reasonable. Kids strive to meet the expectations that we set, and they need to know how much they matter to us. And when we lower our expectations, because we know that the kids are going through significant trauma or adversity, it sort of leaves them with the message that you don't think they can handle things. So we have to come at them with these expectations that we have. And again, keep them high, but be reasonable about it. You might have to provide some accommodation for that. But when we are able to hold our expectations high, it gives them the message that we believe in them, that we know they matter, and that you're not going to judge them based on what they're going through. Promote their contribution as they grow in confidence. We are built, like I said earlier, we're built to be of service to others. They've done research studies with babies that can't even speak. They're just toddling around, and an adult drops, I think this is the research of Larry Brentro, brain-based, I can't remember the book, but Larry Brentro is the researcher, and he took a look at little kids who couldn't barely even walk, and he had adults like drop a paper, and that infant went to pick it up and hand it back. So in little studies like this, plus bigger studies, it proves that we are built to be of service to others. And Brene Brown and other researchers will say we're hardwired to connect. We're social beings. So the C of contribution is knowing you're making a difference in the world. The ultimate act of resilience is having the ability to ask for and give a helping hand. So we need to know that we're working towards competence, but that it's okay to ask for help. I move into a lot of schools after a tragic event, and I'm talking with the youth in what we call safe rooms. And so they come into the library and media center, and they're feeling very impacted by whatever tragedy has just occurred in the school. And it's not uncommon that I see youth who come to me and tell me that they're the people that their friends lean on, that they have to stay strong, and that nobody really knows how negatively this experience is impacting them. Because I'll ask them, have you shared what you're feeling right now with your friends? And they say no, because they're hurting too. And I have to be the one who has to be strong. And so I tell them, we're built to be of service to other people. And so in a sense, when we have helpers, I tell them that they're actually helping their friends feel better if their friend can help them. And they look at you, and even adults I've said this to are like, I've never really thought about it that way. But when you're feeling distressed and when you're feeling hurt and you need that helping hand, to be able to ask somebody or to be able to share a little bit of that vulnerability with someone else gives them an opportunity to build their agency, to build their sense of contribution. Because we're built to be of service, you grow them. So when you need help, asking for help from somebody else actually helps them. And so in a sense, you can feel like you're a helper, even when you need help. That made sense. Coping and control. Every child's behavior is their best solution to whatever problem they have or whatever goal they're trying to reach. It's our job to help them solve those problems or reach those goals using healthy coping strategies. And when kids feel powerless to affect change, they feel small and are more likely to find negative things to help them escape or get that false sense of control. Even angry outbursts, somebody typed in the chat earlier, that rage. Anger is a masking emotion. It masks lots of feelings that are much more vulnerable for them to feel, like hurt, sadness, anxiety, fear, guilt, shame, all of that anger masks. So when your child or student is angry, you can try to look below that. But even more than that, anger is a function of power. When we feel powerless and out of control, we can act angry because in a sense, it gives you that control. And so it's sort of paradoxical that when a child is feeling most out of control, they try to gain control by becoming angry and raging. Have you ever seen somebody who's just, it's like this sense of power that they feel inside. So just to try to take a little look at that anger, and what we need to do is not take it personally, but help them. And also, let me just say, when a child is acting angrily, it doesn't equate all the time to aggression. And a lot of us become very afraid because of those mirror neurons, right? Somebody's acting really angry, it's going to trigger something in us, and we want to retreat or we want to fight. And so you know, fight or flight, either you're going to be right back up in someone's face, or you're going to be like cowering away and want to run away or escape from it mentally or physically. But it doesn't, anger doesn't necessarily equate to aggression. And so if we know that right away, we can help to de-escalate that anger. I would say here, don't be afraid to discipline, but not as a form of punishment, but as a way to teach responsibility and standing strong when our kids have experiences that we need to consequence. But discipline is, you know, what does it mean? It means to teach. So we need to help them by holding this discipline and providing some natural consequences or actual consequences to behavior that, again, holds the expectation high. Even though you've had this adversity, it is not okay for you to A, B, C, D, or E. But letting them know that their freedoms and privileges that they have earned are by their ability to demonstrate responsibility. So again, competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, and control. It's just a nice, easy way to say, this is how we develop resiliency in our kids.
So some of the things that are coming up, Nancy, our students are not alone, set expectations for our children and learners. I love the idea of building relationships and modeling best practice, the 7 C's, the concepts of resiliency and how to support students, the model idea. Not so much strategies to change the child, but strategies for adults to use to help children cope. Not reacting if you're triggered. Understanding not all anger is aggression. Understanding what our natural reactions are to behavior. Hope. Remembering that meeting routines and predictability as we move towards planning for the fall to help everyone. Building relationships. Doing a weekly SEL lesson. They're all part of the 7 C's, a close relationship with an adult, the importance of building and maintaining relationships, clear expectations, managing feelings and adult behaviors, how some school policies and procedures can trigger trauma. That was a new one. Adults cannot give if they are not equipped to help. Think critically about how some school high expectations, close relationships, and how some concepts align beautifully with effective classroom management and culture building.
Absolutely does. And I can say here, you know, like this is absolutely things that we've already done. And I will do trainings for teachers. And when I talk about those strategies, and somebody actually typed it in, there's strategies more for adults, right? So sometimes teachers are looking for the do this, A, B, C, D, and these are strategies for life, I guess. And when we can give, it's the old cliche, you have to put that oxygen mask on yourself first, but we can't breathe resiliency into someone else if we're depleted. And if you look at your life, you know, like a bank account, right? If people are just always making withdrawals and we're not finding some way to put some deposits in there for ourselves, we can't give it away. And so the more you can focus on yourself, it is sort of, sounds like it's being selfish, but being selfish for a greater purpose. We need to grow ourselves in order to help others grow themselves. And so I will open this up now. I don't know if we have any questions.
We've had sadly a rash of suicides recently in our area. My son actually has 3 friends that have committed suicide in the last 2 months that he's aware of. So this topic is really relevant to me and my family and my field right now. How do we listen and lead and be available without romanticizing this? because we certainly don't want to make it worse. Can you speak to that? Because adolescents are wanting to talk about that with parents, with their teachers, with each other. But I also want to be cautious of this is truly a real problem right now.
It is. And I can so relate to your question, and thank you for that. And I'm very sorry. I don't know if you can share, if you feel comfortable sharing in what area. I was just doing some consultation with, I think, the west end of the state, who had suicides, multiple suicides over the course of many months. And so we need to look at that. So is that same area?
No, Plymouth, Canton, Ann Arbor area.
Okay. So
Yeah.
So I just was reading an article, maybe this is something you're referring to, but they had an article in the Free Press of a young boy who had just taken his life. And I read that while I was in communication with some folks from Detroit Public TV who said, wow, look at this. And it is a true balancing act that we have to follow, and not, as you said, is it Eliza or Lisa? Glamorize.
Eliza, thank you.
So in this Detroit Free Press, if any of you read that, was an article of a very tragic loss of life from a student who seemed to be extremely high achieving, no warnings given, was a helper. You know, much of what we talked about here is that you want to help other people. And so this young man was a helper. But I said, as I read that, what I read was all this pressure that he put on himself to achieve at such a high level that we lose, you know. And so what is the balance between helping the survivors of suicide loss, the people who were significantly impacted by that death, because that type of an article really helps them to feel better and to move on their journey of healing. But at the same time, it kind of paints a picture for those that are already vulnerable to suicide that, okay, I know him and I know how he was as a human being. And if he had it all together and felt like he needed to die, then what must I have to do? Because I'm also feeling all of this. And so I have to, this isn't a suicide prevention training and it's very complicated, but we don't put the idea of suicide in someone's head. What I'm saying right now is if there are youth who are already thinking about suicide for themselves and they see stories of somebody that they may idolize or look up to or relate with, and they don't see the problems, the inner struggles, the secrets that person is carrying, and they're not known, then they can go back themselves and say, I've been thinking about this too. And he didn't have half the problems I had. So maybe now, you see what I'm saying? And that, I think, leads to some copycat behavior or some suicide contagion that's out there specifically in youth. It is a very, very dangerous time. And so we have to balance out finding the ineffective coping that people who die by suicide might have with trying to acknowledge that they were great human beings. We don't want to judge a person. We just need to highlight that they had significant struggles in their life that they didn't have effective coping strategies to manage through. And I don't know if that makes sense. I always hesitate talking about this because there are so many people in this audience I know that have been touched by suicide, and it's certainly very complicated. I don't know if that answered your question.
Somewhat, thank you. I understand it's a difficult topic, but I also think if you can't address it with what happened, why are we in this meeting? So thank you for addressing it.
Yes, and they do, and schools do need to address suicide, and we need to do it in effective ways. And so I say, you know, we do need to do, I say effective postvention is prevention. And so if we're not effectively helping our community heal through this without glamorizing, without glorifying it, and without sweeping it completely under the rug, because if we sweep it completely under the rug and we don't address it head on, then we leave those kids who are feeling vulnerable to suicide with this idea that nobody's going to care anyways. But so we do need to talk about it in a very open way. And I talk with kids anytime I'm responding in a postvention scenario to a suicide. I will ask every single student and adults for that matter that I'm talking to what thoughts of suicide they've had. And many, many, many times people will say, how did you know? I haven't told a soul. So we have to be more familiar and comfortable with asking the question, because so many of our youth and people just overall carry this burden in silence in ways that we can't pick up on very overtly. Other thoughts or questions? Oh, 10 o'clock.
Well, this has been very informative, very timely, very, very important. It's something that I don't think people always talk about, and it's something that hopefully our schools will consider. I know I really personally appreciated the information. I know that I will pass it on to my schools in Shiawassee County and Clinton County, because I know our schools are struggling with some of this. I also think, as I heard it, listening to what you had to say about kids, I think we have to think about that as the adults as well, because I think some of our adults are experiencing exactly all those attributes and traits and challenges that you described that our kids have. And with the whole mirror effect, that actually can impact what happens too.
100%, 100%.